Hey everybody, this is Perch. I'm going to talk about a problem in comics, but it dawned on me because I talk about problems in comics all the time. But one of the things that I think, at least in my mind, separates just complaining from actually being able to do some good is that a lot of the problems in comics, nearly all of them, are solvable. What I mean by that is if you look at stuff like if you were, for example, in the video store business where you're renting video cassettes, then you had a problem because you had you're trying to shuffle your business to DVDs or Blu-ray. But if you were looking at at any kind of length in the future, you knew that digital was going to take that out. You knew the direct ship to your home that Netflix was doing was going to take you out. You had threats from every direction, and so the problems that you had from from a business perspective were terminal. They weren't necessarily solvable problems. The way you solve that is, close your shop and do something else. Whereas with comics, it's very different than that. Creative IP, even if comics start getting printed or everything goes digital or there becomes, different ways to kind of do things, you can take Matt Fraction's idea from way ago and the artist would basically create kind of images, and then it'd be a choose your own adventure where the fans would actually, in some cases, help create the comic they wanted versus just consume it. There's lots of different answers to comics, and the majority of comics, the problems in comics are largely self-inflicted. There isn't a major burning platform that exists that's taking comic books away. People have said things like, well, video games and all the rest of it. And there's different things that are going to compete for people's attention, but it's not like video games took out movies or music. And believe it or not, there was a point of view. If you go back to the early 90s, there were technologists out there. And I remember them who were saying that video games would eliminate the movie industry because, who wants to sit and watch a movie when you can just, actually be immersed and play something? And clearly movies are not dying. And so, I guess people, every now and then people do these videos like Hollywood is dying. It's like, what are we referring to? Hollywood, the location, Hollywood, the California Hollywood way of making movies? Are we talking about movies at all? Like what are we, I, it seems to be different people mean that in different ways. But movies are not dying. And so if you look at comics and I talk about problems on this channel, at least, and maybe this is me justifying it to myself or coping, or whatever, but I don't believe this channel is super negative. I talk about problems, but I'm talking about them from a perspective of but here's how we can solve them. And I think I not that I need the endorsement, but I had a chat with Scott Snyder recently at the convention, and Snyder's like, this is a guy who loves comics, and it's true. It's absolutely true. I especially love it when comic people come on my show, right? Right, Scott? You could be interviewed. It'd be fun. Yeah, whatever. Uh, which will die first, by the way? Me making jokes about Arby's or Scott coming on the show? Which is gonna go away first? Anyway. But I want to talk about one problem in comics that is, in my mind, a very, very deep problem, but it's a solvable one. Not easily, but it is a solvable one. And it's basically this. There's a problem with getting creators, getting people to come on your books and do the best work of their careers, be either the best writing or the best drawing or the best coloring or whatever it happens to be. Actually, you know what? I take it back. If you're a colorist or you're a letterer, in many cases, I do see people in comics, swinging for the fences and doing the best job they can because there's still, largely something in it for them. There's not other, mediums out there to be a letterer. You kind of the comic job you got is the one you got. So that's why you have different people who've been famous there. You have like Tamara Bondillon, who gets an immense amount of work and is, relatively stable and not relatively, just very stable and very secure in that, in what, what Tamara gets. And it's because colorists are, it's just an easier thing. But if you're an artist or a writer, that's say easier, but more. I'm struggling with basically more set in comics. Like Sharon Von Villen can't go, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to go work in movies and I'm going to color things over there. It doesn't work. But comic artists, comic writers both have other options. The challenge is you have an entry group of people in the writing side of the world that tends to be people who are big time comic fans, have always wanted to get in, have been struggling for DC or Marvel to notice them for years. Finally, they're getting their opportunity and they're writing some comics. And on the art side of the world, you have a lot of people who are coming from other countries, who are outside the US, being paid less and less, and that's where they're at. And then you don't really have, it's kind of like the economy, you don't really have a middle class in the sense of you tend to have this kind of entry level of writers and artists, especially true for artists. And then the artist tends to, go off and do indie work or Kickstarters or whatever they happen to be to keep going. And then you have a tiny, tiny little sliver of, truly superstar artists that either have the background and the bank to back it up, or they have got a good relationship going on with a writer or somebody along those lines. So take, for example, you've got Ryan Otley, who is, got a great friend in Kirkman. I would easily argue the guy's a superstar artist. Is also helps that, a very tight translation of a lot of what he did is showing up on Amazon and a show that's doing very well. But all the same, went over to Marvel, got some books, was treated like a superstar there mostly, but still, the guy wasn't exactly like completely calling his own shots, still had to work mostly within the system. You got a guy like Greg Capullo who is actually can name his own ticket, but how many of those are in comics? There's very few compared to all the people who are doing art. So, but the gap between kind of new artists coming in from, Portugal or Brazil and Greg Capullo, that's a massive gap between the two. And there's not clear ways to get from point A to point B. And if you're a writer and artist, at least for working for the big two, and still today, working for the big two is how you're going to get the best attention for yourself, barring a couple very, very small exceptions, Ryan Otley being actually one of them. But by and large, if you're going to get noticed as a writer and artist, you're going to have to do a stint in Marvel or DC. Kirkman did a stint in, obviously in Marvel. Scott Snyder has been big in DC, did some independent work back at DC now. But by and large, you have to take that, trial by fire within the big two. Now that may change over time and probably will change a little bit over time. But today that's if you want to get that initial attention, that's where you go. And then the question is, how soon do you dip out? Because it's financially, it's in a bad model. But the problem that we have in comics is you are not incented to do your best work outside of helping market yourself. And this is the problem with the independent contractor model versus a full-time employee, maybe you get an exclusive with one of the publishers, but even there, it's not amazing what you get. And it's, the problem with being a contractor is by not being tightly connected to the company. If your comic does well, your reward is, hopefully some royalties, although sometimes not even that. And the, a name recognition allows you to get more work. That's it. That's your big benefit. And it's just, that's not a great benefit. Quite frankly, if you're one of the lower tier artists, you're basically breaking into the industry. The book does well, you're able to get more. You're talking about a ridiculously long climb to get to that level of financial security that you get to be a Greg Capullo. And Capullo, how long did it take to get there? I mean, he was doing work and, working with Todd and, doing all that stuff back in the 90s. I mean, we are talking like 3 decades to get here, and he worked for it, and I'm not dismissing that. Good for him. But, there as an independent contractor, I mean, things aren't as favorable today as they were in the '90s. So, if you're talking 30 years from today, in an industry that, is struggling to sell as many copies as it did 30 years ago or even close to it, then you're talking about a very long haul to achieve superstar status, and you're kept as a contractor, at arm's length at best. And you're not necessarily getting health insurance or any of that stuff. Like that, like there's like this is a major problem in comics. There is no incentive, particularly if you work for the big two, to do your best work. If there's no incentive for you to do your best work, and you don't do your best work, and then you're less likely to kind of knock it out of the park. You're going to hope it happens in the indies, but that's that's not a surefire bet by any means. I mean, this is a problem. This is a not chicken and the egg, but I mean, this is a legitimate business problem where the lifeblood of comics, having amazing, flashy stories and art and selling millions of copies requires that the talent is knocking out of the park doing their best work, but they're not going to do that if they're not paid to do it. If there's not a big financial incentive, no stock, no long-term guarantees, are you really gonna you're gonna promote, you're gonna work sometimes your hardest, but only for yourself, as opposed to being incented to work hard for the company, which then would help boost the company, which then would create more books, which then would create more sales, more distribution, which would give more opportunities, and in theory, more visibility for you, which it all does help. But it's just a steep argument if you're a creator to say, sweat and bleed for Marvel or DC or those two for 30 years. This is a solvable problem. You got to put more incentives in for the creators, but it is a problem. I've outlined it. Do I have a solution? Not as much as I wish I did. But I mean, it basically comes down to you're going to have to offer profit sharing or stock or some kind of long-term incentive, something that basically says, hey, if you keep your nose clean, you work hard, you put out your best work, you don't flame out, you don't do weird shit. There's a back end, a money for you to keep you comfortable. If we keep you comfortable, you're going to be putting out better work. You get insurance, you're going to be healthier. And that benefits you, but it also benefits me, the publisher, because I get a reliable talent. Yeah, there you go. Anyway. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Blah, 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 blah. Thanks for listening.